All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into Garware Technical Fibres Ltd, GTFL for short. And they make a really surprising range of products. We're talking like ropes, fishing nets, even stuff used in like huge construction projects. They even make sports equipment. So we're going to be using their annual report and some public info to kind of get under the hood of this company. It'll be like your cheat sheet to their history, their place in the industry, how their financials look, and what the future might have in store for them.
It is pretty fascinating how diverse their products are, and they're not just some local player. They operate in over 75 countries.
Exactly. So to get us started, where'd this company even come from?
Well, going back to 1995 when they were founded, their focus was synthetic cordage, like basic ropes and twines, the kind you might picture on a ship or in like industrial settings.
Okay, so the classic sturdy rope.
Yeah.
But they didn't just stick with that, obviously, because their annual report mentions fiber and industrial products and projects. It sounds a lot more high-tech.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They really evolved. Like now they're into geosynthetics, which are these specialized materials used in all sorts of infrastructure projects. Think erosion control, reinforcing structures. Pretty essential stuff, especially with all the infrastructure development going on around the world.
And all this is happening from their manufacturing hubs in Pune and Y, both in Maharashtra, India. It's pretty impressive how they've scaled up from these locations to go global. Plus, they're listed on both the Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange of India, so they're definitely on investors' radar.
Absolutely. And if we look at the bigger picture of the industry landscape for fiscal year 2023-24, globally, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride. There are signs of recovery, but there's also lingering challenges that have impacted the entire sector, kind of a year of navigating choppy waters.
Yeah, that makes sense. So within this mixed bag economic climate,
Yeah.
any bright spots?
Well, some segments showed real resilience. Aquaculture, for instance, the demand for fish farming and sustainable seafood is only growing. Then you've got geosynthetics, which, as we talked about, are tied to infrastructure development, a sector that tends to be pretty resilient even in economic downturns. And of course, the sports industry continues to thrive. People always looking for the latest and greatest gear.
That's a good segue into GTFL's performance. Their latest annual report shows total revenue for fiscal year 2023-24 hit T4 325.61 crores, a 2% increase from the previous year. Not a huge jump, but still growth in a somewhat unpredictable economic environment.
Yeah, that 2% increase is important to look at in context. Given the global economic uncertainty, holding steady and even seeing a little growth is actually a pretty decent sign, suggests they're weathering the storm pretty effectively. What do you think?
Yeah, totally agree with you on that. So let's break down those revenue numbers a bit. I'm curious about the split between their domestic and export markets. How much of their business is happening within India versus globally?
That's a really good question. It turns out that a big chunk of their revenue, around 59% actually, comes from exports. So that tells us they're not just a big fish in a small pond. They're out there competing and succeeding on the international stage. Thoughts on that?
Definitely paints the picture of a company with a broad reach. I'm also curious about how that revenue breaks down across their different product segments. Do we have that level of detail in the report?
We do, and it's really interesting when you see how those segments are performing. Let's start with their geosynthetics division, a star performer for sure. Not only did they exceed their revenue targets, but they've also landed some key international projects, especially in Central America. They even tackled a complex river erosion control project. Shows they're not afraid of challenging projects and can adapt to specific customer needs.
So it sounds like they're really becoming like a go-to solution provider in that space. What about their performance in their other segments, like aquaculture and sports?
Well, in aquaculture, they've got a real stronghold in both domestic fisheries and international markets. Their high-quality fishing nets and products are well regarded in the industry and in sports. They've carved out a niche for themselves, particularly in cricket. If you've watched a professional cricket match, chances are the nets they're using are made by GTFL.
Wow, so they're supplying the pros. That's pretty powerful. A real testament to the quality and durability of their products.
And speaking of domestic versus international, their report highlights significant growth in their domestic value-added product segment. So it seems like they're balancing global expansion with strengthening their position at home.
Yeah, and that makes sense considering nearly 41% of their revenue is generated domestically.
Yeah.
It's all about diversifying their portfolio, mitigating risk by not relying too much on any one market. Now let's move on to everyone's favorite topic, profitability. Their consolidated operating EBITDA for the year was 314.81 crores. And for those unfamiliar, EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Basically, it gives us a clearer picture of their operating profitability before taking into account things like debt and accounting quirks. But to really get a sense of their financial health, we need to look at those EBITDA margins and their PAT, which stands for profit after tax.
Absolutely. Those figures give us a much better understanding of their efficiency, how well they're managing costs, and ultimately how much profit they're generating from their core operations. What aspects of their financial performance stand out to you from their report?
I'm struck by their focus on cost efficiency, especially considering those economic headwinds they were facing. It's not just about growing revenue, it's about making sure the growth translates into sustainable profits. That's a sign of a company that's thinking long-term and not just chasing quick wins.
I agree. They've been very proactive about optimizing their operations, and when you look at the revenue breakdown across their segments, technical textiles, aquaculture, and sports, you can see how they've strategically allocated resources to maximize profitability in each area. A smart approach, for sure.
So we've established they're a significant player in their industry. They've got a global presence, solid track record of profitability. But what about their competition? Are there any major rivals we should be aware of? Or are they pretty much dominating their space?
Well, like any industry, there's always competition. But GTFL has managed to stay ahead. By focusing on what makes them different, they're not just pumping out generic products, they're investing in research and development to create innovative solutions that set them apart, gives them a competitive edge, allows them to command a premium for their products.
That's a smart strategy. And speaking of innovation, they've also been making some interesting moves towards sustainability. Like, I was intrigued by their efforts to transition to a more energy-efficient fleet of vehicles. They're phasing out those old diesel forklifts and replacing them with electric ones.
Yeah, and that's not just good for the planet, it's good business. Electric vehicles tend to have lower operating and maintenance costs, which can have a positive impact on their bottom line.
Right. It's a win-win. They're reducing their environmental footprint and saving money at the same time. Their report had some pretty impressive figures on that, too. They've already replaced 8 of those diesel forklifts, resulting in a reduction of over 4,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. That's a significant commitment to environmental responsibility.
It really is, and it's a trend we're seeing more and more in the corporate world. Companies are realizing that sustainability is not just some feel-good initiative, it's good business. Consumers are increasingly demanding eco-friendly products and services, and investors are prioritizing companies with strong ESG performance.
Makes sense. But it's important to look beyond those feel-good initiatives and see if they're actually walking the walk. And in GTFL's case, it seems like they're making genuine efforts to integrate sustainability into their operations.
Totally agree. They're not just talking the talk. They're taking real action. And it's not just about swapping out forklifts. They're exploring renewable energy sources, like solar power, to power their operations.
And their report mentions they're looking at ways to incorporate recycled materials into their products. Not only reduces waste, but it resonates with consumers who are environmentally conscious. A smart move from an environmental and marketing perspective.
Absolutely. They're thinking holistically about their environmental impact and finding ways to turn it into a competitive advantage.
So we've got a company that's performing well financially, making strides in innovation, embracing sustainability. Seems like they're on a pretty good track. But no company is completely immune to risk. What are some potential challenges that could impact their future performance?
That's an important question to consider. One inherent risk is the volatility of the global economy. We've already seen how economic uncertainty can impact their growth. Another thing to keep an eye on is the fluctuation of commodity prices, which can significantly affect their input costs. For instance, a lot of the materials used in their products are derived from petroleum, which can be subject to some pretty big price swings.
Right, so even with a strong focus on cost efficiency, external factors like rising commodity prices could put a squeeze on their margins.
Exactly. And of course, there's always the possibility of increased competition, both from existing players and new entrants into the market.
Yeah, that's true for any industry. But from what we've seen, GTFL seems to have a good grasp on these risks. They're diversifying their portfolio, investing in innovation, building a strong brand reputation.
I agree. They're not resting on their laurels. They're proactively addressing potential challenges, positioning themselves for long-term success.
Okay, so they've got a solid foundation. But to really understand their financial stability and growth potential, I think we need to go a little deeper into some key areas. In the next part of our deep dive, let's explore their order book, which gives us a peek into their future revenue streams. We should also analyze some key financial ratios, That'll give us some insight into their financial health and how well they're managing their resources. What do you think?
I think that's an excellent plan. Those deeper insights will help us understand not just where GTFL is today, but also where they might be headed in the future. As we start digging into GTFL's financials, their approach to managing their order book really stands out.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the story with their order book? What kind of trends are we seeing? What does it tell us about their future?
Well, from what we can see, their order book looks pretty strong. It seems like they've been successful in securing a steady flow of contracts, building up a good pipeline of future projects. It suggests a healthy demand for their diverse product range, which is always a positive sign for growth.
So it's not just about their past performance. It's about having a solid foundation for future revenue. A strong order book kind of gives us a glimpse into what we can expect in the coming years.
Exactly. It provides some predictability, which is really valuable in a volatile global market. Knowing they have a healthy backlog of orders can give investors confidence in their ability to weather any economic ups and downs.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious to dive into those key financial ratios you mentioned earlier. They can give us a more in-depth understanding of their financial health and how well they're managing their resources.
You're absolutely right. Those ratios are like vital signs for a company's financial well-being. They give us a snapshot of their financial strength and help us assess their performance beyond just revenue and profitability. So let's start with their debt-to-equity ratio. This tells us how much debt they're using to finance their assets compared to the amount of equity they have.
Okay, help me out here. So a high debt-to-equity ratio would mean they're taking on a lot of risk, while a low ratio suggests a more conservative approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And from the data we have, it appears GTFL maintains a pretty healthy debt-to-equity ratio. This suggests they're not overly reliant on borrowed money, which is generally a good sign for their long-term financial stability. It means they're not putting themselves in a position where they could be overwhelmed by debt obligations.
That's good to hear. But what about their ability to handle short-term financial obligations, like paying their bills and managing their working capital? Is there a ratio that can give us some insight into that?
Yes, there is. It's called the current ratio, and it measures their ability to cover their short-term liabilities with their short-term assets. Basically, it tells us how easily they can pay their bills and manage their day-to-day financial operations.
So a higher current ratio would mean they have plenty of assets available to meet those short-term demands, and a low ratio could signal potential trouble.
You got it. And based on what we have, GTFL seems to have a pretty solid current ratio. This indicates a healthy level of liquidity, meaning they're well equipped to handle unexpected expenses or any bumps in the road. They're not likely to be caught short-handed when it comes to meeting their financial obligations.
Okay, so they're managing their debt well.
Yeah.
And they have good liquidity. But what about their overall profitability in relation to the investments made by their shareholders? Is there a ratio that addresses that specifically?
There is. It's called return on equity, or ROE. This ratio tells us how effectively they're using their shareholders' money to generate profits. It's a measure of their efficiency in turning investments into earnings.
So a higher ROE is good, right?
Yeah.
It means they're making good use of those investments and generating solid returns for their shareholders.
Exactly. And from the data we've seen, GTFL has consistently maintained a pretty respectable ROE. This suggests they're using their investors' capital wisely and delivering a decent return on those investments, a sign of a well-managed and profitable company.
I know all these ratios and financial figures can be a lot, but it sounds like GTFL is in a pretty solid financial position overall. They're not just focused on growing revenue, they're paying attention to their balance sheet.
Yeah.
And generating good returns for their investors.
You got it. They're taking a balanced approach to financial management, which is essential for long-term sustainability and success. They're not just going for quick wins, they're building a solid foundation for continued growth and profitability.
Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about innovation. In such a fast-paced world, staying ahead of the curve is crucial for any company's survival. How is GTFL approaching innovation? What are some of their key initiatives in this area?
One thing that's really clear from their annual report is their commitment to research and development. They're not afraid to put resources into exploring new materials, technologies, and manufacturing processes. That commitment to innovation is essential for them to stay competitive and develop new products to meet their customers' evolving needs.
So it's like they're always looking for ways to improve and adapt. In today's world, standing still is like moving backwards. Can you give me some concrete examples of their innovation efforts? What are they doing that sets them apart?
Well, remember those electric forklifts we talked about earlier? That's a great example. It's not just about being eco-friendly. It's also about finding smarter and more efficient ways to work. And that focus on efficiency extends to other parts of their business too. Like they're exploring renewable energy sources, like solar power, to lessen their reliance on fossil fuels. They're even experimenting with using recycled materials in their products, which not only cuts down on waste, but also appeals to those environmentally conscious consumers.
So they're being pretty holistic about innovation. Considering the environmental impact as well as the business impact of their decisions, they're not just trying to create the next cool gadget. They're trying to find solutions that make sense on multiple levels.
Exactly, and that's what sets them apart. They're not just following trends, they're setting them. They're weaving innovation into everything they do, from product development to manufacturing to their sustainability strategy.
It's really impressive to see a company so committed to pushing boundaries, finding new and better ways to do things. But let's be real, no company's perfect. Are there any potential weaknesses or vulnerabilities we should be aware of when we're thinking about GTFL?
You're right, every company has its challenges. One thing to keep in mind with GTFL is the cyclical nature of some of the industries they're in. For example, the demand for infrastructure projects can go up and down, depending on government spending and the overall economic climate. So even with a strong order book right now, their future revenue could be affected by things beyond their control.
So even if they're doing everything right internally, external forces could still mess things up. It's like trying to sail a ship through a storm. You can have the best crew and the strongest ship,
Yeah,
but you're still at the mercy of the weather.
that's a great analogy. And that's where their diversification strategy is so important. By operating across multiple industries and in different parts of the world, they can lessen the blow of any downturn in a particular sector. It's like having a diverse investment portfolio. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
That makes a lot of sense. Spreading the risk across different parts of the business can definitely help them weather those economic storms. What about other challenges, though? Any internal factors that could pose a risk to their success?
One thing to think about is the rising cost of raw materials. Many of the materials they use in their products, things like polymers and synthetic fibers, come from petroleum. And those prices can be really volatile. So even with their focus on efficiency, their efforts could be outweighed by those rising input costs.
So even if they're running a really tight ship operationally, external factors like commodity prices can still impact their profits.
Exactly, and that's where their R&D efforts come in again. By developing new materials and manufacturing processes, they can potentially reduce their reliance on expensive raw materials and buffer themselves against those price fluctuations. It's a constant game of trying to stay ahead and find ways to stay profitable as the market changes.
Sounds like GTFL is aware of these challenges and taking steps to address them. They're diversifying their business, investing in innovation, exploring new ways to manage costs. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing we need to talk about. Human resources. In such a competitive business world, attracting and keeping talented people is super important. How is GTFL handling their human resources? What are they doing to create a good work environment? We'll explore that in the final part of our deep dive into Garware Technical Fibres Ltd. We talked a lot about GTFL, their financials innovation, their approach to sustainability, but we haven't really talked about their people. A company is only as good as its workforce, so I'm really curious to hear more about how they manage their human resources, what's their philosophy when it comes to their employees.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Can't overlook the human element. And from what I've gathered, GTFL seems to be taking a very proactive and human-centered approach to managing their workforce. They really seem to recognize that their employees are their most valuable asset and they're treating them accordingly.
Okay, that's great to hear. So what are they doing specifically to create that positive and productive work environment we were talking about?
Well, for starters, they seem to have a genuine commitment to employee well-being. They're investing in comprehensive health and safety programs. They provide generous benefits packages, and they're creating a work culture where employees feel valued and respected. It's not just about checking boxes, it's about creating a workplace where people feel supported and cared for.
That makes sense. Happy and healthy employees are generally more productive and engaged, but it's not just about keeping employees content. It's also about helping them grow and develop their skills.
Yeah.
Right. What's GTFL doing in terms of training and development?
That's a great point, and it's another area where GTFL really shines. They're committed to providing opportunities for professional development. They offer a variety of training programs to help their employees enhance their skills and advance their careers within the company. They're not just throwing people into the deep end, they're equipping them with the tools and knowledge they need to succeed.
That's a smart approach.
Yeah.
Investing in employee development not only benefits the individuals, but also strengthens the company as a whole.
Yeah.
It's like a rising tide lifts all boats.
Okay.
Are they just focusing on formal training programs, or are they taking a more holistic approach to learning and development?
It's actually much broader than just formal training. They're really fostering a culture of continuous learning and knowledge sharing. They encourage employees to share their expertise, mentor each other, and learn from their collective experiences. It's a very collaborative and supportive environment.
I love that it's like they're creating this learning ecosystem within the company where everyone benefits from each other's knowledge and growth. That's how you build a truly engaged and innovative workforce. But it's not just about skills and knowledge, right? It's also about creating a sense of community and belonging. What's GTFL doing to foster that kind of environment?
Well, they're really big on teamwork and collaboration. They encourage open communication, and they're really trying to create a sense of camaraderie amongst their employees. They host team building activities, social events, and they really make an effort to create a workplace where people feel connected to each other and to the company's mission.
It sounds like they're going above and beyond to create a workplace where people feel motivated, engaged, and really invested in the company's success.
Absolutely. They seem to really understand that a company's success is not just about the numbers on a balance sheet. It's about the people who make those numbers happen. And by investing in their employees' well-being, their development, and their sense of belonging, they're creating a solid foundation for long-term success.
Well said. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Garware Technical Fibres Ltd, let's do a quick recap. We started by exploring their history and how they've evolved from a company focused on simple ropes and twines to a global player in technical textiles, aquaculture, and sports equipment.
Right. And then we dug into their financial performance, highlighting their strong revenue growth, their consistent profitability, and their real focus on cost efficiency.
We also talked about their commitment to innovation, especially their sustainability efforts, and how they're working to reduce their environmental impact while making their business even better.
And we can't forget about their really impressive efforts in human resource management, creating a workplace where employees feel valued, supported, and encouraged to grow and do their best work.
Exactly. So, all in all, it seems like GTFL is a company that's doing a lot of things right. They're financially sound, forward-thinking, and they're genuinely committed to making a positive impact on the world, both environmentally and socially. They're not just making products, they're building a sustainable and responsible business.
And that's a powerful message for all of us as consumers and investors. We have the power to support companies that are making a positive difference. And as individuals, we can learn from GTFL's example and strive to make a positive impact in our own lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into Garware Technical Fibres Ltd. It's been fascinating, and I hope you learned something new. Be sure to tune in next time for another insightful exploration of the business world.